To make this cube storage shelf, I'm using 4/4 walnut and maple, and I'm starting off with the shelves, which will be made entirely out of 4/4 maple. The first step is cutting 4 pieces at 51 3/4 inches, which will be glued together to make 2 shelves. Each one of these shelves needs to be at least 11 inches wide. My boards had really odd widths, so I ripped everything in half to get the most out of the material to get 2 11-inch pieces, but this is optional. After that, I glued together 2 shelves with all of those strips. When the glue dried, I planed everything down to the final thickness of 3/4 of an inch, and then I trimmed down to the final width of 11 inches. After that, I could cut to the final length of 51 3/4 inches. Now there should be 2 of the same shelf, so the next step is to add dividers in between these and then above the second shelf. To make the dividers, I'm using similar panels, so I'm going to skip over the process of making those because it's exactly the same. But now I'm going to take those and I'm going to cut them into 6 pieces at 11 3/4 inches. To attach the dividers, I'm opting for dados, 3/4 inches wide and about 1/8 inch deep, all the way along each one of the shelves. For gluing the dividers in place, I'm starting with each shelf individually, and something that really helps here is using 90-degree clamps, because it's nice to have everything square when you go to glue both pieces together, because you know it's already going to line up nicely. Moving on to the legs, I'm using walnut, and they'll be 1.5 inches square. So I'm starting off by cutting 1 5/8 inch strips out of the walnut, and it's about 13-16 inches thick, so I'm gluing everything together in pairs, because by the time I glue 2 together, I should have 1 5/8 inches square for 4 legs. So after the glue dries, I then go over and plane it to its final thickness, 1.5 inches square. And then after that, I can take it over and trim it to the final length of 26.5 inches. I'm using dados to connect the legs to the shelves. The first dado will be 11 5/8 inches from the top, and then the second dado will be 1 7/8 inches from the bottom. After that, I can glue on the legs, and something to point out here is I'm gluing them on with the whole thing upside down. So you can see the top is going to end up being flush when this is flipped around. After that, I move on to sanding the whole thing with some 80 grit just to get that out of the way, and then I add a chamfer to all of the edges. Here's a last minute idea I had. I cut all of the corners on the top dividers that face the front of the shelf. So as you can see here, it'll be underneath the top. Now the last thing to add to the main body is the adjustable feet, and it's the same kind I've used in other videos, and I'll have a link in the description to exactly which ones I used here. Moving on to the top, I'm making it out of both walnut and maple. So I start off by cutting all of the pieces to 5 feet in length. And then with the maple, I'm cutting that into 1/8 inch strips because the maple is going to be more of an accent to the top. At this point in time, I didn't fully know the design I wanted, but I wanted it in the upper third. So for the initial glue up, I glued together a walnut board, maple strip, and then followed up with other 2 walnut boards. Once that dried, I cut out a section about 2 inches on each side of the maple strip. And then I took that section I cut out, and I used my track saw to cut out a zigzag pattern along that entire piece. Next, I glued up more maple strips in between all of these pieces from the zigzag, and this was pretty tricky. I just had to be really careful clamping this up so it wouldn't slide apart. After the glue dried, I planed down all of the top pieces to get a nice even thickness just to prep them for glue up. And the middle piece I had to do a lot of joining, again, just to clean up all the pieces sticking out. But then I could re-glue it up together again, and I added more maple strips on either side of that middle zigzag section. After the glue dried, I sent it through the planer again, and I really liked how the pattern looked when it came out, so I ripped it down to its final width and then cut it down to its final length. Now to finish off the top, I cut the corners as kind of a decorative choice, but then I could finally sand down the entire project to 120 grit and apply wipe-on oil-based polyurethane.